I'm doing an internship at the hospital right now, which means my schedule is all over the place. Some weeks I work nights, other times I'm on early mornings, and occasionally I get stuck with a brutal 24-hour shift. It throws everything off: your sleep, your appetite, even your sense of what day it is. I started noticing patterns in other ways, like how quiet my apartment gets, or the sounds you catch only when you're supposed to be asleep. I live alone in a small unit in Albany, about 20 minutes from the hospital. Older building, post-war, decent insulation, but the kind of place where you still hear creaks and settling at night. I'd been in that unit for almost a year when I first noticed it. Soft tapping sound coming from behind the bathroom wall. It happened around 2:30 a.m., give or take. I remember the first night clearly because I had just come off a tough double shift. I thought maybe I was imagining it, or that it was the radiator kicking in. But the next night, it was there again, and the night after that. It wasn't loud, more like someone tapping lightly on a table with a fingernail. It came from the wall right behind the towel rack, the one that separates my bathroom from the unit next door. I remember staring at it thinking, okay, maybe it's pipes. Old buildings do weird things in winter. I asked my landlord about it. He shrugged and said it was probably the plumbing, maybe air in the line. He offered to send someone over, and I agreed. A couple of days later, a plumber showed up, did his thing, banged on a few pipes, ran the faucet, and said he didn't find anything unusual. That should have been the end of it. But the tapping didn't stop. In fact, it got weirder. I started noticing that it would stop when I entered the room. I'd be brushing my teeth and hear it start, then pause the moment I spoke or moved, like it was listening. One night, I just stood there with the water running, not brushing my teeth, just listening. And sure enough, it came again. Tap, tap, tap. I said out loud, "What the hell is that?" And it stopped, instantly. That was the first time I felt uneasy. A few days later, I decided to record it. I left my phone on the sink with the camera pointed at the towel rack and hit record before I left for my shift. It felt silly, like I was ghost hunting in my own bathroom, but I needed to know. The next morning after my shift, I watched the footage. For the first few hours, nothing. Then at 2:28 a.m., the tapping started. I leaned in, squinting at the screen. The sound was clear, rhythmic. But then something else joined it. Breathing. Very faint, but definitely breathing. Long and slow. And then something metallic scraped against the wall, like a coin sliding across a countertop. I must have sat there, replaying that 30-second clip a dozen times, trying to convince myself it was just ambient noise, maybe a heating vent, maybe my neighbor dropping something. Except that neighbor had moved out 3 weeks ago. That unit was supposed to be empty. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I emailed my landlord again. Asked politely if he could check the unit next door. I said I thought someone might be squatting in there. He called me back an hour later, said no one had the keys, that the unit was sealed for repainting, but he offered to meet me the next day and check it out together. When we got there, the place looked undisturbed. Fresh paint, empty floors, no furniture, nothing odd, except for one thing. On the shared wall, exactly behind where my bathroom towel rack would be, there was a small indentation, like the drywall had been tampered with. He noticed it before I did, got down on one knee and ran his hand over it. Then he said, "That looks like a patch job." I remember holding my breath as he grabbed a flashlight and carefully pressed against the area. The paint was fresh, but the wall gave slightly, like someone had cut into it and tried to cover it up. He ended up calling maintenance. They removed the patch. Behind it was a hole about the size of a coin, drilled through the wall, and wedged inside it, angled just so, was a tiny mirror. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it. They took it out, handed it to the landlord, who didn't say much. He looked disturbed. We checked the lease records. The tenant before had left without notice, just stopped paying rent and vanished. No forwarding address. Nothing left behind. I went back to my place and reviewed the rest of the footage. At exactly 2:33 a.m., there was a moment where the mirror caught just enough light from the hallway through the gap under the door. And in that moment, in one freeze frame, I saw something. My own reflection. Clear as day. The mirror had been angled to watch me. The breath I heard? Real. The scraping? Probably him adjusting the mirror. The timing? Always around 2:30, right after my shower, when I'd come back into the bathroom in my robe, brushing my hair. I didn't sleep that day, or the day after. The landlord called the police. They came, asked questions, took photos. But since the unit was empty and the previous tenant untraceable, there wasn't much they could do. No fingerprints. No signs of break-in. Just a hole, a mirror, and weeks of unanswered questions. I moved out a month later. Even now, I still keep a white noise machine on at night, and I check every wall in every new place I live. The scariest part was the idea that someone was watching me in my private moments in the bathroom, and I almost never noticed. I moved into my duplex at the tail end of October, just before the weather really turned. The place was in Madison, in a quiet neighborhood that felt more like a sleepy suburb than a college town. Tree-lined streets, plenty of joggers during the day, and yeah, raccoons going wild in the bins after dark. Pretty normal. It was a side-by-side duplex. Identical units mirrored across a central wall. When I moved in, the other side was empty. The landlord told me someone had just signed the lease and would be moving in the following week. That person did show up. I saw the truck. It was a chilly Saturday morning. I was setting up my office in the spare bedroom when I noticed a U-Haul in the driveway next door. A guy in a gray hoodie and jeans was unloading boxes by himself. Mid-30s, maybe older, with a short beard and ball cap. He didn't look up much, just kept his head down, carrying boxes inside, never once looking over. I thought about going over to introduce myself, but I figured I'd give him some space. Moving sucks. I figured I'd catch him the next time I saw him out. Except that was the last time I saw him. Literally. Weeks passed. I never saw him take out the trash, never saw a light turn on through the front window. No packages showed up. The mailbox stayed empty. The blinds were always drawn. At night, that side of the house looked abandoned, but it wasn't silent. I work from home building websites, and my hours, let's just say they wouldn't make sense to most people. On a few late nights, I started noticing soft creaks from the shared wall. Floorboards settling, maybe. At first, I didn't think much of it. Old houses make weird sounds, and it was getting colder. Then the thud started. It was around 2 a.m., the first time I heard it. Not loud enough to startle me, but consistent. Heavy footfalls moving across the floor, but they weren't walking like someone going from the kitchen to the bathroom. It sounded like pacing. Every few nights, it would happen again. Always late, always rhythmic. Sometimes it went on for over an hour, but no lights ever came on. Not even a porch light. One night, I stayed up editing a site mock-up for a client. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the footsteps again. This time they were faster, like someone was walking in circles. I got up and walked to the shared wall, pressing my ear against it. Nothing. Silence. I went to bed, told myself it was just an old house. Maybe I was hearing my own footsteps echo. But it got stranger. In early November, it snowed hard for the first time. A thick, crunchy layer that covered everything. I went out the next morning to shovel the front walkway and noticed something weird. My side had fresh footprints. His side? Not a single one. No shovel marks. No tire tracks. Nothing. I went around back to check the alley-facing garages. Same story. Mine was cleared out. His was untouched. The snow looked like a white sheet tucked tight around a corpse. I went back inside, pulled up the property records online, just to check. The leaseholder's name matched the guy I saw. So someone was living there. Or had lived there. The next week, I knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again the next day, earlier in the afternoon. Still nothing. I texted my landlord, "Hey, just curious if the guy next door moved out already. Haven't seen him since the move-in." He replied, "Nope, lease still active. Everything should be fine." Everything should be fine. But I wasn't convinced. About a week later, I started waking up with the feeling that someone was watching me. I know how that sounds. But it wasn't the cliché kind of paranoia. It felt specific. I sleep with my door open and my bed faces the hallway, which leads to the living room. One night I woke up at 3:17 a.m. and thought I saw a flash of light in the hallway, like a small reflection or flicker. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to check. Nothing, but I left it on and did a sweep of the house just in case. Windows were locked. No one outside. 2 nights later, same thing. Woke up around 3 a.m. This time, I noticed the light was coming from the air vent in the ceiling. A faint gleam, like metal reflecting. That vent led to the attic. I stood up on the bed, aimed my flashlight at the vent, and the gleam disappeared. I couldn't see much through the slats, but something about the angle looked wrong, like it had been tilted. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I went out and bought a stepladder. The attic access was in the hallway ceiling. It wasn't locked, just a basic pull-down panel with a wooden ladder. I waited until mid-afternoon when the sun was out and everything felt less like a horror movie. I climbed up and opened the hatch. Cold air rushed down. The attic wasn't huge, just a narrow crawl space that ran the length of both duplex units. The floor was boards laid across beams, insulation puffed up between them like old cotton candy. I scanned my side first. Nothing. Just dust and dead flies. Then I looked toward the divider wall, which wasn't solid, just a plywood sheet nailed in between the 2 attic spaces. But the plywood wasn't flush. Some of the corners had started to peel away from the beams. I reached forward and tugged on one of the loose edges. The sheet shifted. Behind it was a hidden pocket of space, and inside it, a rolled-up sleeping bag, a small lantern, an empty water bottle, and a bundle of wires. I froze. The plywood hadn't just been nailed up. It had been adjusted. Recently. I crouched down and followed the wires. They led to a small box wedged into the corner, a battery pack connected to a mini camera. It had been pointed right at my side of the attic, right toward the air duct. I backed out of there fast, called the landlord immediately, told him everything. To his credit, he came over that same day with a locksmith. They opened the neighbor's unit. It was empty. Not like moved out empty. Like no one had ever unpacked. A few unopened boxes stacked in the living room. A mattress still in plastic. No food in the kitchen. No clothes. Just a folded blanket in the bedroom and an envelope with the lease agreement sitting on the counter. The landlord was confused. I was furious. The police came, took the camera, filed a report. They checked the attic more thoroughly and found signs someone had been sleeping up there for weeks. Maybe longer. But there was no sign of the man himself. No activity on the lease account, no utilities ever activated, and the guy never registered with the city for trash pickup. He just disappeared. The police put out a request for information, but nothing came back. No one in the neighborhood remembered seeing him after that moving day. The U-Haul had been rented under a different name, paid in cash. So either someone let him stay there without telling the landlord, or he signed the lease just to get access. But access to what? There's a part of me that wonders if he was ever planning to live there at all. Or if the lease was just a cover to get into the attic. I moved out 6 weeks later. My new place doesn't share walls with anyone. My name's Rick. I'm a mechanic here in Bakersfield, born and raised. After years of saving and pulling long hours at the shop, I finally managed to buy myself a modest 2-bedroom place on a quiet street in the summer of 2021. Simple place, but it had what I wanted: space, a decent little yard, and a detached garage I could use for side work. The garage was one of those split units. Same structure, but clearly divided down the middle with separate doors, walls, even its own lights and meters. My half opened to the driveway. The other side faced the alley behind the property. The listing was crystal clear. I had rights to the left side. That was in the deed. No confusion. The day I moved in, the other unit was empty. But about a week later, I came home to find someone unloading furniture into the duplex next door. Older guy, maybe mid-50s, wiry build, wiry mustache too. Looked like someone who'd been dried out by the desert sun. He saw me, nodded, and went back to dragging a rolled-up carpet across the lawn. I figured I'd introduce myself properly later. A few days after that, I was organizing tools in the garage when he strolled up to the open bay. "Hey," he said casually, like we were old neighbors. "Mind if I grab a few things from my garage?" I looked at him, a bit confused, but figured maybe he had some leftover stuff stored from a previous rental or something. "Which one's yours?" I asked. He jerked a thumb toward the side I was standing in. "That one." "No," I said, keeping it friendly. "This one's part of my property. You've got the right side, through the alley." He paused for a beat. "Nah, pretty sure the whole thing comes with my unit." I wiped my hands on a rag and pulled up the property documents on my phone. I had pictures of everything from closing. "See? Split structure. This one's mine." His eyes stayed on mine longer than they needed to. No expression. Then, just like that, he nodded. "Guess I was wrong," and walked away. So far, so good. I thought it was just a weird misunderstanding, but I didn't like the way he'd said it. Flat, no apology, no real acknowledgement, just a blank stare and a retreat. For a while, nothing else happened. I kept to myself, used the garage on weekends to do minor repairs, oil changes, brakes, stuff like that. Occasionally, I'd see him walking along the alley or pulling a tarp off some rusty old lawn furniture in his yard. We never spoke again. Then, one Thursday night, I got home late after a job that ran long. My garage door was cracked open about 6 inches. Not wide, but enough to notice. I knew I hadn't left it like that. I flicked on the outside light and stepped inside. The smell hit first. something rotten, thick and warm like wet fur and old meat. I found it pretty quick. A raccoon. Dead. Nailed to the far wall, sprawled out like some kind of grotesque display, and right under it, written in black marker on a ripped piece of cardboard, "Stay out." I filed a police report the next morning. They came out, took photos, asked me a bunch of questions. I told them about the neighbor, the conversation, the garage dispute. They nodded along, but didn't seem all that concerned. No camera footage, no witnesses, no hard evidence. "Could be a prank," one of the officers said, like that was supposed to be reassuring. They offered to do a welfare check on the guy, but I declined. I didn't want to poke the bear if they weren't going to do anything serious. I replaced the lock that day, bought a heavier duty bolt, reinforced the frame. I also installed a motion sensor light and an old trail cam I used when camping, aimed directly at the garage door. For about a week, everything was quiet. Then I started hearing hammering. It always happened late, like someone was building something or maybe tearing it down. It came from inside the garage wall. The dividing wall. I went out with a flashlight once and banged on the wall myself. The sound stopped immediately. Next morning, everything looked untouched from my side. The wall was still intact, but the cam footage from that night was weird. It recorded until exactly 2:13 a.m., then cut out. No sound, just static. A few days later, I got home from the shop and noticed the smell again. Not as strong as before, but faint, metallic, earthy. That's when I found the wall, or what was left of it. The dividing wall had been partially torn down from the other side. Slats pulled off, insulation exposed, dust everywhere. But not all the way, just enough to crawl through. Just enough to slip in unnoticed. There was a single folding chair in the center of the empty space. A thick rope was coiled next to it, partially frayed. On the chair sat a small plastic folder, like the ones contractors use for blueprints. Inside the folder, photos. Old, yellowing snapshots. All taken from inside the garage, from different angles. Most were of the street, the front of my house, and my driveway. But one photo made my throat go dry. It was my front door, taken from inside the garage, from my side, before I moved in. There was no mistaking it. The sagging porch mat, the cracked tile, the warped screen door I hadn't replaced yet. All there, all captured from a spot that no one had access to, not unless they'd already been inside. I took the folder and the photos and went straight to the landlord. He looked through them, growing visibly uncomfortable. When I asked him if he knew anything about the guy next door, he sighed and sat down. "That used to be his place," he said. "He was the owner before me. Had to sell it after things got bad financially. But he never really accepted the sale. Always insisted he still had some right to the property." I asked why he'd rent to him again. "I didn't," the landlord said. "He just showed up one day, told me he was staying with someone. Figured it was temporary." That night, I went to the police with the folder in hand. I showed them everything. They came out again, did another sweep. But the neighbor's unit? Empty. Totally cleared out. Like he'd never moved in. No furniture, no clothes, no utilities under his name. Just a cot in the corner, a camp stove, and one single thing taped to the wall. A printed image of a property map. Mine was highlighted in red. They opened a case but didn't find him. Said he must have skipped town. That maybe he was squatting all along. I changed the locks on the house, not just the garage. Put up cameras. Slept with a bat next to the bed. It's been almost 2 years. I haven't seen him again. But sometimes when I'm working late in the garage, I still pause between engine revs or the clank of a wrench and just listen. And once in a while, I swear I hear something knock. 3 times, then silence. I work early mornings at a store in Little Rock, so I'm usually in bed before midnight, even on weekends. That night was no different. I was already half asleep, curled up on the couch with the TV on low and the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me. It was hot. One of those sticky July nights where the air feels like soup even after the sun goes down. I remember thinking I should get up and shut off the porch light and lock the deadbolt before heading to bed. But before I could even move, everything flickered. The TV shut off. The fan stopped spinning. Every light in the house blinked once and went dead. I sat up confused. Thought maybe the power had gone out. It wasn't just my house. I looked out the front window and the entire street was dark. All the porch lights, all the floodlights, everything. Except for one house. My neighbor, Greg. His living room window still had a faint glow behind the blinds. I could see it clearly, like a soft, greenish hue, which was weird because he's the kind of guy who keeps his place like a server room. Dark, cold, quiet. And that light, it wasn't normal. I didn't think too much of it. Power flickers aren't uncommon here when the ACs are working overtime. But just as I turned away from the window, I heard it. Crunch. Quiet. Almost easy to miss. But yeah, definitely footsteps on gravel. I stood still and listened again. My driveway is gravel, and I know what it sounds like. You can't walk up it without making noise. So I turned off the flashlight on my phone and stood in the dark, peeking through the slats in the blinds. Nothing. The driveway was empty. The yard was still. But I could feel something was wrong. I backed away from the window, moved to the side door, and made sure it was locked. Then I checked the back door. Locked too. A few minutes later, I was brushing my teeth when I heard it again. This time, from my bedroom window. I didn't go in. I just stood frozen in the hallway, toothbrush still in my mouth, staring down the short stretch of carpet to the bedroom door. The window in there faces the side of the house. There's no walkway. No reason anyone would be out there. I stayed still. The footsteps didn't continue. I decided I wasn't going to sleep in that room that night. I pulled the blanket off my bed and went back to the couch. Locked myself in the living room. I figured if someone was out there, I didn't want to advertise I was still awake. Morning came. The power was back. Everything seemed fine, but it bothered me. I checked the motion sensor camera I had above the garage. It records clips when it detects movement, and it has a small battery in case of power outages. There was nothing. Not a single trigger. I thought maybe the outage had messed with it. But then I checked the app's log. The system was working fine. It just never recorded anything, even though I clearly heard someone outside. I called my landlord, told him about the outage and the weird noises. He brushed it off, said it was probably a raccoon. I asked him if the shared circuit ever causes outages like that. He said no. My house has its own line. A week later, he came by to take a walk around the property. He was checking the outside wiring to see if there was anything off. I was at work, but he left me a voicemail. "Hey, just wanted to let you know I found something strange. Give me a call when you get this." I called back on my lunch break. He said that right outside my bedroom window, lying in the grass, he found a small night vision camera. It looked like it had been dropped or maybe tossed aside. The lens was intact, but part of the casing was scratched up. That wasn't the only thing. There were footprints, dozens, all around the house, visible in the dry dirt and patches of dead grass. Some right beneath the windows, some by the back fence, some near the garage. He waited for me to get home, and we both stared at the camera. He didn't even want to touch it. I grabbed some gloves, took it inside, and pulled the memory card. I should have waited for the cops. But curiosity beat caution. I opened the files on my laptop. The footage started in grainy black and white. At first, just static shots, my house from different angles, then clips through the windows, me sitting at the table, holding laundry, watching TV, all from outside. Then came the worst one, a video from the night the lights went out. It showed me on the couch, like before, but then the camera angle shifted slightly, like whoever was holding it crouched lower. And in the faint reflection of the window, I saw him, Greg, just standing there, holding the camera, just watching me. I slammed the laptop shut and called the police. They came out, bagged the camera, took photos of the footprints, but nothing ever came of it. Greg was gone 2 days later. No warning, no note, just gone. His windows stayed dark after that. The landlord changed the locks and put up a for rent sign. I still live here. For now. But every night, I triple check the windows. I unplug anything with a lens, and I don't sleep facing the blinds. Someone watched me once, and that's a feeling I'll never forget. I moved into this house in Sacramento in early May. I'd just gotten out of a relationship, and it was the first time I had a place all to myself. And weirdly, it felt kind of freeing. The house wasn't huge, but it had a cozy front yard, a quiet street, and that peaceful suburban feeling that makes you think nothing bad could ever happen there. 2 houses down lived an older woman named Marjorie. She was probably in her 70s, always wore a floral apron, and had that soft, wavering voice you only hear from people who've been telling bedtime stories for decades. We didn't talk much beyond casual waves and brief greetings, but she was friendly. Once, she brought over a plate of snickerdoodles and told me she used to bake them for the little boy who lived here before. That made me pause. I said, "Oh, that must have been a while ago. The realtor said the house was empty for nearly 10 years. She just smiled and said, "Yes, but I still remember him." That was it. I thought it was sweet. Sad, maybe. I assumed she was just a lonely woman holding on to memories. I didn't think about it again until the day she waved at me from the sidewalk and said, brightly, "Let me know if you ever need a babysitter for your son." I blinked. "I don't have kids." She looked confused, still smiling. "But I've seen him. He plays in your yard sometimes." I laughed, thinking maybe she saw a neighbor's kid wander into my yard. "Are you sure? Maybe you're mistaking me for someone else." She didn't laugh back. "He has that little blue jacket. The one with the stars." Now I was just uncomfortable. I told her again that I didn't have any kids, and she kind of nodded like she didn't believe me. I went back inside, locked the door, and stood at the window looking out at the yard. It was empty. Just an old bird bath, a cracked stepping stone path, and my garden hose half coiled like always. Later that night, I decided to check the security camera I had set up. It was a basic motion detection one I pointed toward the front yard. I didn't expect to find anything. And I didn't. Not that night. But 2 days later, I got a notification while I was at work. Motion detected. I opened the feed and saw Marjorie. She was standing on the edge of my lawn, facing the bushes near the side fence. She was talking, but there was no one there, just whispering to the empty air. When I zoomed in, I saw her holding something out. A small toy, like a red race car. That was the moment the unease really settled in. That evening, I walked over to her house, intending to confront her or at least ask what was going on. She didn't answer the door. I knocked again. Nothing. Then her next-door neighbor, a guy named Alan, came out and said she had gone to live with her daughter in Fresno 2 days ago. She left? I asked. He nodded. Yep, packed up fast too. Seemed off lately, talking to herself out front. I told him about what she said to me, about the boy, the babysitting offer, all of it. Alan looked uncomfortable. She used to babysit the kid who lived in your house back in the 90s. Little guy named Danny. Sweet kid. But he disappeared. Never found him. Cops searched for weeks. I felt my stomach tighten. What happened to her after that? I asked. She took it hard. I think she blamed herself for letting him out of her sight. They never proved anything. After that, she kind of went downhill. Never left the neighborhood. Always said she'd see him again someday. That night, I went through every saved camera clip I had. Most were normal. Delivery drivers, wind-blown branches, birds. But one video made me pause. It was from a week prior, time-stamped 3:17 a.m. It showed Marjorie again, standing in the same spot by the bushes. But this time, she was holding both hands out like she was lifting someone up. Her mouth moved slowly, like she was cooing. Then she stepped back, looked toward the camera, and smiled. A few days passed. I thought maybe that was the end of it. No more weird sightings, no strange sounds. But then, early one morning, I stepped outside to water the plants and noticed something behind the bushes. It was a tiny blue jacket, covered in dirt, with faded stars on the sleeves. I didn't touch it, just called the police immediately. They came, took photos, and carefully bagged the jacket. Turns out it was a match. Same jacket Danny was wearing the day he vanished. They started digging, found bones, tiny ones. The yard was declared a crime scene. The entire street watched from their porches while police set up tape and brought in forensic teams. I had to move out for a while. Stay with friends. I kept thinking about all the times I'd walked past that spot, mowed the lawn, watered those bushes, never knowing what was underneath. A few weeks later, I got a call from a detective. They'd been piecing together what they could. No official charges yet, but the consensus was that Marjorie likely knew more than she let on. The weirdest part? They found an old photo album in her house. Inside were pictures of her with various kids she'd babysat over the years. And tucked in the back, faded and wrinkled, was a photo of Danny, standing in the front yard of my house. If the scariest part wasn't who they were, but how close they lived to you, hit that like button, subscribe for more true horror, and tell us which moment gave you the worst feeling. And if you think getting out of the house makes you safer, think again. Click now to watch 4 very scary uber horror stories, because sometimes the ride is the trap. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.